Masses and groups. Social systems generate intersubjective dynamics which are known as groups or masses. When mass effects are generated in the communicative interaction, the flexibility in the system gets lost. It becomes a red massa 10, network mass 10, where information is regulated and controlled in benefit of the mass. It becomes a mob of subjects that are tied up together by identifying traits, suggestive, which generates relationships where the independence of the individual profits at the expense of the emergence of subjectivity. It is due to the predominance of imaginary bonds, libidinal, established by the participants among themselves, among them and their leader or ideal one. Autonomy as well as identity are lost in this relationship, where the subject aims to configure itself, resembling the other as an example. There exist some unstable flows that lead masses to their destruction. The reason is that once they are set as such, their ability of individual criticism is lost, as well as the responsibility for those actions they provoke. For example, crowds that spontaneously emerge or violence at stadiums. There are also more organized masses which succeed in preserving their organization, generating dynamics which are kept by the strong ties established among the subjects, among them and their conductor, or towards an ideal one. Freud explains, in group psychology and the analysis of the ego, that those subjects who interact in groups lose their individuality because the dispositions they establish are labile, unstable, and sometimes even aggressive. The mass is extremely persuadable and gullible. It is uncritical. Improbability does not exist for it. It reflects through similar images that it recalls not a single national situation concords with reality. The feelings of the mass are always euphoric. It goes from one extreme to the other. If there is a suspicion, it turns into an unquestionable certainty, a seed of apathy, which turns into savage hatred. However, in the network group, there exists a dialectic relationship between the autonomy of the singular speech and the dependence in relationships. The former enables individuality, singular and peculiar processes of individuals, emergence of subjectivity, and the latter facilitates the emergence of a group speech. In this relationship, the group speech is the possibility of interaction that every subject creates, keeping its critical thinking and responsibility toward its peers and its environment. Therefore, different denominations are created as well as categories to describe the network dynamics. For example, in the processes of social investigation, discussion groups, primary or natural networks are mentioned, like those established in the daily life of a social pre-existent actor, family ties, neighborly relationships, work relations, to mention some. Artificial or secondary networks are also mentioned. These are the ones emerging from a specific environment, those created in an investigation process. We can also mention identification networks, those that have a common or similar identity, or correspondence networks, which are set up around concrete and specific objectives to describe notions, as it is the case of environmental networks. Addressing the communication process from the perspective of complexity, as Morin states, shows us a new approach to complexity. He asserts that complexity is a web, complexus, what is made together, of heterogeneous constituencies inseparably associated that displays the paradox of the one and the multiple. Complexity is also portrayed with disturbing features of being tangled. It shows order with its never-ending opponent, chaos. Morin speaks of complexity in conjunction with two terms that seem to exclude themselves, but once we return to ourselves, we found them closely interlinked. It is not easy to apprehend life by laws or principles that impose the paradigm of simplicity, to state order in our universe, and to chase any kind of disorder and chaos. Simplicity, which either separates the unified or unifies what is diverse, introduces the concept of disjunction reduction, opposed vigorously to the evil duo of complexity, order, and chaos. Postmodernism confronts us with various pathologies that affect the modern thought. Hypersimplification, which blinds the spirit, the complexity of the real. Idealism, where the idea hides the reality that it pretends to translate. Dogmatism, which encloses the theory in itself. Rationalism, which locks reality in a coherent system. This blindness is part of our barbarity. We are always situated in the human being prehistory. Complex thought will only allow us to civilize our knowledge. Men are born supported by biology, like a puppy. In order to become a subject, they need another human being's assistance. In this process, men grow apart from their biology to be undergone and determined by culture and the spiritual. They are mainly subjects of the unconsciousness, a subject in the universe of language, ideas in consciousness, and effects of our consciousness. They are also determined by energetic psychic chemical traits, formed by elements communicated among themselves without us being aware of. From our complexity point of view, when we love biologically and also culturally. We follow an ideal built in ourselves through education or a reaction to it. We love chemically. Our glands release substances that excite and attract other glands that approach us. We also love unconsciously. Our instincts want to relieve tensions produced by our drives. And finally, we love without knowing why we do it. We quote Pascal to illustrate the inseparability that affects everything we face and everything that is presented to us as complex. All the things being caused and causative, aided and aiding, indirect and immediate, being related through a natural insensitive bond that links together the most distant and most distinct. I believe it is impossible to know the parts without knowing the whole, and also to know the whole without knowing the parts. From this perspective, to get to know the reality, we cannot give up either on the whole or the parts. Marin suggests 3 principles to help us think of complexity. 1. The holochromatic principle, in which not only the part is in the whole, but in a certain way the whole is in the part. Those relationships that are established between the whole and the parts are complex as the different parts of the union constitute the whole, and at the same time it retroacts on various elements that constitute it, granting properties they lacked. The relationship of the whole to the parts is not merely accumulative, but also caring. The parts form the whole, but at the same time, the whole retroacts on the parts, being given them new skills they did not possess before combining with each other. The product is producer of what it produces and the causative effect of what it causes. 2. Recursive organizational principle along with 3. Dialogical principle, which is based on the complex association of necessary instances together for the existence, functioning, and development of an organized phenomenon, along with the hologrammatic principle, where not only the part is in the whole, but the whole, in a way, is in the parts, constitute the instruments that help us move in complexity. We should not content ourselves with finding certainty in the fundamentals of classic knowledge, in the separability of objects, and in the deductive identity logic. The complex knowledge confronts the uncertainty, inseparability, and those insufficiencies. We are now at a point that there is not unique or the last fundament for knowledge. In a universe where chaos, disorders, and chance oblige us to negotiate with uncertainties. Although the acknowledgement of not finding certainty where there is none constitutes uncertainty in itself, the acceptance of confusion can turn into a way of resistance to the mutilating simplification. In the beginning, lacking of an approach, we have a pseudo-approach where ignorance, uncertainty, and confusion become assets. Our known intention of not giving up on the whole and the parts seems to turn into an impossible business. It becomes a vicious circuit, absorbed by the logical impossibility, hopelessness of the encyclopedic knowledge, and the omnipotent resignation of the principle of disjunction and the absence of a new principle of organization of the knowledge. We are facing a vicious circuit of encyclopedic range which has neither a beginning nor a method of organization. We can only preserve the circularity, connect with the circuit in order to not be inscribed by it. The ambition of eliminating contradictions and antinomies seems unreasonable. Willing to break with the circularity makes us fall once again with the principle of disjunction reduction. To maintain circularity is to respect objective conditions of the human behavior, which always results in a paradox and uncertainty. Circularity provides us with knowledge that reflects us on ourselves, transforming the vicious circle into a virtuous one. Then, according to Marin, we should be cautious not to separate from the circularity. The circuit will be our will, our spiral route. The insurmountable ambition of the encyclopedic knowledge cannot be considered just as cumulative terms. Now it is about to set knowledge in cycles, manage what is dissociated, and should be essentially together. We need to relearn how to learn, forming an organizing principle of knowledge which combines the object description, the description of the description, and the disinterment of the descriptor. We face the birth of a new paradigm, the paradigm of complexity, which begins to exist during the crisis that affects knowledge in our times. A paradigm which accepts that the only worthy knowledge is the one that nurtures itself from uncertainty, and that the only living thought is the one that stands the temperature of its own destruction. In the physical world, we can find a perfect example of coexistence between order and chaos. Then, stars are not only wonderful machines of watchmaking, they produce order, organization. They are cosmos, but are also chaos, such as climate variations. In other words, reality processes depend on an enormous array of uncertain circumstances, which determines, for example, that any little variation somewhere in the world provokes a significant effect on the other side of the world in the next coming days or weeks. The chaos caused in the stars generates interactions and at the same time allows those encounters that result in organization, atoms. The relationship of chaos, interaction, organization, order is present in every complex phenomenon. Order and disorder co-produce themselves mutually. They need each other. They have a solidary relationship, a genetic one, and the genesis has not ceased. We are still in the dilating cloud and a universe that continues expanding. The above is known as the butterfly effect. As originally outlined in meteorology, it can be expressed in standard phrases such as a butterfly flapping its wings in China can produce a hurricane in Texas a month later, said Einstein. Even the smallest drop of mist fallen from a rose petal to the ground impacts on the furthest star. Complexity is not based on giving certain and closed answers, but on the challenge of living in the uncertainty. The paradigm of complexity is an emerging tendency that will arrive together with new concepts, new visions, new discoveries, and new thoughts. which will be connected and will gather in a theoretical opening. This new paradigm invites us to think of an open theory which requires our efforts to elaborate itself. It needs the simplest and the most difficult, to change the baseline of reasoning and of associative repulsive relationships among some initial thoughts, which the whole structure of reasoning depends upon, will allow us to open new ways of thinking, to create ourselves, to create and reinvent ourselves in a constant and continuous spiral of evolution.